Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the meeting of the Historic Preservation Commission public hearing and of July 20th, 2021. It is approximately 9:10. I'd like to have introductions, if I may, please, starting with the commissioner on my right. Oh, on my very right.
Hi, Susan Swift.
Missy Shoecraft.
Dominique Cobb.
Vivian Salaga.
Carrie Ann Canch.
We have all received copies of the minutes from the previous meeting. Is there any comment or question regarding any of the issues represented in the minutes? And if not, may I have a motion to accept the minutes as submitted?
Make a motion to accept the minutes as accepted.
A second, please.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. The minutes are accepted. Are there any announcements today?
Yes. Good morning, Commissioners. Elaine Lund with the Historic Preservation Commission staff. I'm here this morning, and with me also from staff is Beverly Jusak and Kamaria Pettismackle from legal. That concludes any portion of announcements, and with that we can move into conflict of interest and ex parte communication.
Good morning, Kamaria Pettismackle from the City Attorney's Office. Will the Commissioners please state whether or not they have any conflicts of interest regarding any of the items that are listed on the agenda? Hearing none for the record. Additionally, will the Commissioners please state whether or not they've had any ex parte communication regarding any of the items listed on the agenda? Hearing none for the record as well. Thank you.
Then we will move on, please, to the swearing in.
All those wishing to speak, please raise your hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you'll be providing this morning is the truth and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
So we are now on item 7 of the agenda. Elaine, you will be making the presentation.
Yes.
This is the matter at 2114 West Chaton Avenue in the Hyde Park District, redesignation as a contributing structure.
Yes. Thank you, Chair. We have a PowerPoint presentation for you this morning. So make sure that's up on your screens. As Chair Salaga stated, this is for the property located at 2114 West Chaton Avenue in the Hyde Park Historic District. This is the redesignation as a contributing structure of a property that has been relocated within the historic district. This is the subject site now as it sits at its new site or its receiving site at 2114 West Chaton Avenue. The original site for this structure was 1226 South Howard Avenue. So you can see here on the historic district map, the original site where the arrow was pointing, the red arrow was pointing, and then the relocation site in green. This map was last updated, I believe, in 2017. So you'll note that where the green arrow is pointing, there was a building previously there. However, it was a non-contributing structure and was demolished prior to the relocation. This is the 1920s Sanborn map of the area, again with the red arrow pointing toward the original site of the structure, and then with the green arrow pointing at the relocation site or the receiving site. You can see that receiving site was vacant in the 1920s. The red line that sort of runs across diagonally across the top left and down the left side there is the outline of the local historic district. And then this is the present day aerial showing again the receiving site in green and the original site in red. These are some photos of the building at its original site. You can see that it had a enclosed front porch, and there were metal awning windows in the house. You can see that on the front, the side, and the rear of the property. And just a couple of photos provided by the applicant of the house being moved at night through the district up Howard Avenue and under the Crosstown Expressway overpass. And these are the photos from the receiving site or the relocation site following the rehabilitation work that had taken place. The front porch was reopened. The windows were replaced with appropriate wood windows, and additional work was done as necessary to bring the building back to its original appearance. The application criteria for redesignation of buildings relocated within historic districts is found in section 27261B of the City of Tampa Code of Ordinances. The application filed by the owner is to include the reason for the relocation, the setting and environment of the original site, the setting and environment of the relocation site, photographs and site plan, evidence that the building has retained its historical and architectural integrity and is appropriate to the period of significance of the historic district. The application was submitted by the owner. There was a planned development site plan reviewed by the Architectural Review Commission, and it was recommended to City Council, which approved it on May 16th, 2019. So that rezoning, REZ 19-23, takes care of the criteria for the site plan, and the recommendation for it was reviewed by the ARC, so they found that it was a appropriate relocation site. And the actual relocation itself, the construction portion of it was approved by the ARC in March 4th, 2019. The rehabilitation work was approved May 26, 2020, and was completed in May 2021. Additionally, this building was constructed within the period of significance of the Hyde Park Historic District. The criteria for review of the application for redesignation of the building relocated within the historic district is to be applied by the Historic Preservation Commission in approving or not approving an application filed hereunder as set forth in the National Register Bulletin number 15. So National Register Bulletin 15 requires that the building be built within the period of significance of the historic district, and that it embody the distinctive characteristics of a type of architecture represented throughout the district, and also that it maintains its historic relationships to its site and setting. The staff recommendation on this application is that 2114 West Jeton Avenue meets the criteria of section 27261 and the criteria found in National Register Bulletin 15 as a historic resource that maintains the character and integrity of the Hyde Park Historic District. Therefore, staff recommends approval of the redesignation of the property as a contributing structure in the historic district, and also recommends the amendment of the Hyde Park Historic District building inventory. With that, I'm available if you have any questions. The agent for the applicant is also here this morning. If the agent wishes to speak on anything, she may come forward.
Commissioners, are there any questions? No, none?
Hi, Kim Hedlund, Wilder Architecture. I am here just in support to answer any questions you may have regarding this application. As stated, I think we've been through two concurrent and then a separate ARC hearing for the PD, the relocation, and then the rehabilitation. If you have any questions, I'm here to answer them. Thank you.
And since there were no questions prior to the applicant's comments, may I have a motion, please?
happy to.
Okay.
Okay. I'd like to make a motion to include 2114 West Jeton Avenue as a contributing structure in the Hyde Park Historic District because it meets the application criteria of Section 27261 and the criteria found in the National Register Bulletin 15 as a historic resource that maintains the character and integrity of the Hyde Park Historic District, specifically the applicable designation criteria A and C.
I second that motion.
And can you, thank you for the second, Commissioner Conch, but could you also amend your motion to include that the Hyde Park Historic Building inventory will also be amended?
Me?
Yes.
In the Hyde Park Historic Building,
Hyde Park Historic District building inventory will be amended.
will be amended to include this as a contributing structure?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
I second the motion with the amendment.
Thank you.
All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Thank you very much. The next item on our agenda is the Ybor City Local Historic District Design Standards Update.
Thank you. Again, Elaine Lund, Historic Preservation Commission staff. This morning, we have for you a discussion and a brief update regarding the update of the Ybor City Historic District Design Standards. Our consultant for this project, SNME, is continuing its work and its outreach efforts in providing and gathering information from community stakeholders, and has conducted a meeting with them last month. They are now working on drafting the design standards, and we are meeting here today as part of this meeting today. We're to discuss any additional information that, or any additional comments that we would like to, that this commission would like to convey back to the consultant. And we will have a draft of those design standards to bring back to this commission for more review and comment at a later date. So on your screens, you should be seeing the presentation here. So the Historic Preservation Commission, as you well know, has a few key roles. It determines the significance of unprotected historic resources, in one way by changing the status of structures within historic districts, as we just did with the last item on the agenda. Additionally, it forwards recommendations to City Council for local landmarks, multiple property designations, and local historic districts. And the one thing that in addition to that work that this board is charged with, is developing the design standards for local historic districts and updating them periodically. Now, these design standards are used by the other two historic preservation boards that the City of Tampa has, one of these being the Barrio Latino Commission. The Barrio Latino Commission, or the BLC, reviews applications for compatibility with these design standards, and it reviews them to ensure the historic integrity of the structures. It looks at different aspects of work in the Ybor City Historic District, including new construction, additions, exterior alterations, relocations, demolitions, variances, and land use changes. The Ybor City Historic District has a period of significance from 1886, which is the date of the earliest building constructed in the historic district, through 1940. This was listed as a National Register Historic District. The downtown core area of it was in 1974, and it was expanded as a National Historic Landmark District in 1990. Ybor City has had local historic district status since 1975, and that area has generally been what was at that time the area from about Columbus Drive on the north, 4th Avenue on the south, Nebraska Avenue on the west, and 22nd Street on the east. It has been expanded by local ordinance a few times since then, and now reaches as far north as 21st Avenue on the north side, on the northwest side. The district encompasses about 600 acres, which is approximately 1,700 buildings, and about 69% of them are contributing, which is a pretty high percentage for a local historic district. So today we would like to discuss appropriate approaches to rehabilitation. As I have met with other staff members from our office who work routinely with the applications from the Barrio Latino Commission, and we've identified a few items to discuss with you today, that are kind of typical requests, but that are not adequately addressed in the design guidelines as they currently are today. So this is not going to be a thorough discussion, but we've just selected a few of the a few topics here, and we will probably be back to discuss some additional topics at a future meeting date. One of these items is roofing. You've been handed out with your packets today a copy of the Ybor City Design Guidelines if you wish to follow along. The roofs are discussed on page 43 of these design guidelines, of the old design guidelines. So the typical materials that we see on roofs in Ybor City these days, we see some historic roofs still. In the picture on the left, the second house in is a picture of a corrugated metal roof. On the right side, you can see a picture of a stamped metal roof. There are additionally some new roofs. On the left, again, the first house that you see on the left has a standing seam metal roof. And then further in the distance there are some pictures of some houses that have the 5V metal crimp roof. Standing seam metal roofs, such as the one on the Ybor City parking garage here, the Noriega parking garage, are typically a high profile standing seam. They can be up to 2 or more inches high, which is sort of a the scale of it is pretty large and not appropriate for residential structures. On the right, you see a picture of new construction that's going up in Ybor City right now, and this house has a 5V crimp metal roof on it instead of a standing seam roof. And the 5V crimp is seen by both staff and the Barrio Latino Commission as being more appropriate for residential structures. So the roofs on Ybor City's earliest residential structures were of sawn wood shingles. We don't see so many of those today. There are some still at the Preservation Park, which we saw a few meetings ago. The houses that are there that are part of the Ybor City State Museum. However, the most common remaining roof materials are corrugated or crimped sheet metal, embossed sheet metal, or compositional materials such as asphalt shingles or asbestos shingles. The design guidelines for Ybor City currently state that you should replace or repair roofs with materials similar to the original roof materials in size, texture, and color. So as we go through each topic here, would appreciate to have the discussion as we go through the presentation rather than holding it till the end. So we've given you a couple of bullets here to sort of spur conversation. And one of those is, one of the questions here is, should certain materials and types of roofing be identified as appropriate or inappropriate for residential or commercial structures? And should roofing be limited to what was available during the historic district's period of significance? And at this time, I'd like to open the floor for conversation.
Well, that's an interesting question. I would make a comment regarding the second bullet point about limiting roofing materials to what was available during the period of significance, because they may not necessarily always be available in an economically feasible manner for the restoration of today. I think if it is a similar material, then that would be equally as appropriate. I guess a question to you, Elaine, is, has there been feedback from I know that this project has been going on throughout the community. Has there been feedback from the community regarding that particular issue, or is that what generated this issue?
There's always discussion when a roof with a new or different material from what the community is used to seeing, there's always discussion that comes up regarding whether or not it's appropriate, and there's always differing opinions on that matter. So it's useful for staff when attempting to enforce the design guidelines or the design standards to be able to point to something specific, something a little more specific than similar to, or language such as that in the standards, to be able to help determine what is appropriate and what is inappropriate. Roofing or re-roofing a building is one of the items that the code allows staff to do as a routine staff review and approval. Mm-hmm. So it is not necessarily something that will be reviewed by the Barrio Latino Commission at a public hearing unless staff feels uncomfortable with the particular material or it has not been something that's been approved by the BLC previously.
I think I missed a step here by not calling for public comment, or is...
Sorry, Kamari Hepedis-Mackel from the City Attorney's Office. This is just a discussion. There's been a public platform, but I don't know if there...
No comment? No, oh, okay. I would definitely say that certain the materials should be identified as appropriate or inappropriate. And from my perspective, that as you're looking, there is no end to crazy things that can be done on some of these buildings. So I would definitely suggest that be included as something that should be added to the guidelines. Now, these guidelines are really condensed as opposed to what we used to have to deal with these historic districts. And I don't know, unless they are more prescriptive, condensing them, I think, may in fact limit the staff to not have as much flexibility and authority, quite frankly, in dealing with the property owners.
I would agree with that. I think it would be really limiting if we go into details on specifically what materials should be used and what shouldn't be used. Now, the historic materials at the time, that would be difficult for owners because the availability and the expense of the older materials or the materials that were original to the structures at the time. I actually think what's written in the guideline now is appropriate. The only thing it doesn't want, or it's saying it doesn't allow, is do not use rolled roofing material and do not alter the original roof line. And it just looks like it's something about maintaining the original size, shape of the dormers. And then it goes up to say the original roof materials in size, texture, and color. Because since it's a roof, you're not going to see it. You only can see it from the curb. So it's a matter of, okay, does the material represent what would be suitable for the building when it was originally built? And since roofing and just construction in general is like always evolving, yeah, I would agree that if we put a lot of limitations, it would limit it in the future. If this is meant.
Oh, I think they should.
You
put
think
the
they should?
limitations on
I
there.
think they should in a way where it allows flexibility, but I think if you get too limiting, then it might become a hindrance later on.
Well, but the hindrances have to be taken in light of the historic district and maintaining the consistency and the quality of the materials within the district. And we have seen this in other districts as well, that sometimes people will use materials that are not appropriate. So if the barrio has the ability to be able to say, this is appropriate and this is not, and the staff, then I think it allows a greater ability for the staff to be able to talk about roofing, because roofing, quite frankly, unless the rules have changed, roofing is one of those things that can be dealt with at the staff level by a roofing contractor and not have to come before the Barrio Latino unless it's a part of a larger renovation issue. And I do think that not allowing, this doesn't address dimensional shingles at all in the draft that's being proposed, and dimensional shingles are not necessarily a bad alternative to a roofing solution. Rolled roofing is typically what you put under everything, you know. It's not.
Oh, I was wondering what that was.
But I mean, of course, you've seen that as, you know, after hurricane events and so on, there are, that's a temporary solution, but it should certainly never be a permanent solution. But I don't see, on many of the commercial structures, flat roofs are behind the parapet, and I don't see anything in here unless I'm in the residential section. I don't see anything here that addresses the opportunity for a flat roof solution. And I guess many times, several of the new little houses that have gone up in Ybor have had flat roofs, and it's, I mean, I realize it's a contemporary, more contemporary solution as far as residential goes, but not necessarily as far as commercial goes.
I do want to add to, I do agree, I do believe there should be, I guess, some type of structure, because I'm looking at the different facades, like the doors. There are requirements for doors, so I believe there should also be requirements for the roof to make sure that when those structures are rehab, you want to make sure it can still contribute. And if you have that, you know, in this in these guidelines, I think it'll be necessary, because you can rehab windows, doors, and they have to be contributing, or they have to be the original doors and the original shapes and size. So I would think it would be appropriate for the roof to also fall under those guidelines, because you don't want structures that have you know, the same type of color texture, and then you go 4 homes down and this is a flat roof with a different door, but it was a contributing home before.
Okay, well, there's new construction.
So what you're saying is the description is too vague?
I think it's not, I think as staff is suggesting, it's not complete enough.
If you take a look at page 39, it talks more about the facade, but you have more do's and don'ts for facade versus 43, the roofing. So I think it should be some more added.
I agree. I think that, I would say, you know, to question one, should we have, materials that we want and don't want? I do think we need, more detail on that. And I would not make it materials that were only, available in their era. I do
No,
think that makes it
yeah.
more difficult, more expensive, but I definitely think that we need a, more direction of specifically, definitely what we don't want, and also what we do want, and although that, I think that gives some, a narrower window for the staff to have to, either try to be the bad guy or arm twist into it. So I do think that would be important to have more direction on that.
So we are going to be just coming to a consensus and making suggestions to staff to take back. We don't have to vote on any of this?
Correct.
Good. But I noticed in the draft that section we're talking about right now.
Commissioner Salaga, if I may state, this is the current set of design guidelines for Ybor City, the ones that were adopted in 2003. So this is not the proposed draft in front of you.
This is not the proposed draft.
Correct.
Gotcha.
This is currently what we're working with.
No,
I
these are the-
misunderstood that from the
Yeah.
get-go.
These are the
Okay.
current ones. With Mr. Leary's, historic,
Yeah, I think
Nod.
they're probably, the section we're in right now is residential, neighborhood, commercial, residential and neighborhood commercial. Now, is the neighborhood commercial, I should look in the index, but is that a separate section than the main commercial avenues in Ybor?
This section for residential and neighborhood commercial is
There's commercial.
all together
Got it.
here.
That's on
There's some that's,
15.
part of
Okay.
this addresses specifically residential buildings, but the neighborhood commercial is kind of seen as the smaller shops that were located, every
Okay,
few blocks, smaller,
right.
smaller in scale than the major commercial buildings you would see along 7th and 8th Avenues.
I see
On-
that.
on page 27 are the flat roof. Yeah, I agree, Madam Chairman. I was a little worried that those weren't covered, but yeah, that's in a whole different section.
Yeah, on page 27, where there's the discussion of roof lines and parapets for the commercial core. It's mostly talks about the parapets and decoration along them. What's behind the parapet is not seen, so that's typically not been an issue that comes up very often when we're approving
Okay.
re-roofing.
Well, that takes care of my flat roof issue. Yeah.
So I do have a question in regards to, I guess, these current guidelines. Is there anything in regards to environment safety? Because I know some of the older roofs have, there are some issues with, I guess, contamination. Is that anything that's going to be added to the guidelines?
I don't believe with roofing that that's come up as a topic of conversation among staff or with the consultant yet now.
Yeah. Typically, that's covered by the building code, so that once they get their barrio approval, then they have to go to the building department to meet all the other standards that are required relative to the building code. Because at the barrio and at any of the preservation boards, comments, questions regarding code issues never come up.
Good to know.
It's kind of like out of the purview of design guidelines.
Yeah. Kind of as an example, somewhat along those lines, these current design guidelines say to not use the rolled roofing material, but that is not something that would be allowable anyway under the current building code. So, you know, that kind of makes that moot, and that's sort of an example of how these design guidelines really need to be updated.
Let me get back to where we were.
So I guess I have a question, like, so what are the issues that have come up against these guidelines in recent years? Like, has there been issues with this?
So what we see a lot are people wanting to go from, I guess it's a couple of things. One, people who have a metal roof on their house currently, whether it's, you know, the original historic metal roof or a metal roof that has been a replacement metal roof from sometime, you know, since 1940. Will want to go from a metal roof to a shingle roof. And then the other request that we see that we have difficulty with at staff level is people wanting to use the standing seam metal roof that's has the higher profile to it. That's you can see it a bit in this picture, but the scale of it is a little more appropriate for commercial structures. You know, it's a larger profile, higher profile than you would see on the traditional like 5B crimp or even a low profile standing seam roof. There are standing seam roofs that have only a 1 inch high seam, and most standing seam material for commercial structures is 2 inches or greater. So, you know, we do have that come up. Another issue is with different profiles. So there are not just the V crimps or the standing seam profiles, but like different some like an R channel roof. It's kind of difficult to explain, but some people will request that, and it's not doesn't have a profile that's consistent with the V crimp. It's more
A lot of that, Elaine,
Yes.
probably has to do with the fact that most people don't actually, sorry, I thought that was on. Most people don't actually see the difference between a 5V crimp and a standing seam at 1 inch or 1.5 inches or 2 inches. I mean, you can get standing seam even 3 inches high if you want it, but you pay for it. And I think that's why in the past everyone has, I mean, they bring you those variations because in their mind it's all the same thing. And I know with many of the owners, I mean, there is a question of cost. The metal roofs are more expensive, and the dimensional shingles are not. I think what we don't address in here, or I haven't seen it, that maybe you could add to the list, I don't see barrel tile roofs in here anywhere, unless you have classified that, if that's classified under the commercial section. But some homes, the more Mediterranean style houses do have barrel tile in their roofing, and barrel tile now does not have to be cement anymore. They make really good fiberglass components that look exactly like the original concrete tiles. And again, it's a question of durability and cost and ease of installation. But I would imagine at some point somebody's house, I mean, the little shotgun houses that are primarily there in Ybor don't have those, but
No, correct. And to that point, our design guidelines here, it states that tile roofs were rarely found on residential structures. But with the expansion of the historic district over the years, I believe that some of the housing types are more varied now. You don't just see the shotgun style houses and a few bungalows, but you will also find some of those other styles in the expanded residential areas. So I think that is a good point.
Oh. And I guess the question of materials, not just the fiberglass barrel tile, but there are many materials that these days are longer lasting, that emulate the profiles and the contours of the trim materials in particular. I know in the past things like FIPON have not been allowed. FIPON is a fiberglass material that, doesn't rot. And it's a fiberglass material. Once it's painted, you'd have to use a microscope to know the difference between it and a piece of wood. And I don't do the guidelines actually allow for, do these guidelines allow for those kinds of substitute materials? And if they do, if it is allowed, then it ought to be prescripted in the document that would be allowed.
FIPON, it doesn't have asbestos, right?
I guess sometimes, if we want these buildings to last ad infinitum, we need to start helping them to be more durable and longer lasting, because maintenance is always a problem with these buildings. Owners don't understand that wood has to be painted every 5 years in order for it to last. Yeah, the paint materials are guaranteed, but the wood is not, and if any water gets into these things, they disappear, they start to rot. And it's not just that they've got a crack in them, sometimes little bugs that get in them will chew a little opening, and then that's the invitation for the water to get in. But you could put that on your list and see what anybody thinks about that in terms of including it or not including those manufactured materials. When the historic districts were first created, many of those substitute materials were not there. They were not invented yet. So the question, I guess, is going to be is how absolutely restrictive or absolutely purist we want these districts to be. And many people, quite frankly, sorry to say, will sneak them in because the inspector, once he comes around, he can't tell the difference between the material himself when they get them installed. I don't know, in my mind too, it's more a question of the articulation of the detail that's historically appropriate than the material that it's made from. But many people would disagree with me. I can assure you of that. Now on the siding materials on page 48 for the residential, there is no brick. included here. It's all the wood. And some of these houses in Ybor City are built of brick. And I'll tell you, brick repairs are tricky. And if we don't include something, a guideline about matching and color matching and texture matching.
Well, brick is a bit on
This
the
is
other
page
side.
48.
Page
Elaine,
49, yeah.
I'm
Is
sorry?
that something that we'll discuss
Oh, look at page
another
49.
time? These,
that's the brick.
using
it
alternate
looks like,
materials?
Like right behind that page.
Right, I saw that, but I still don't see in the appropriate category, there is no.
Oh, this is artificial.
There is no brick.
Oh.
This says artificial.
Yeah,
Yeah,
artificial.
you're correct, Commissioner Slagan. Again, I think that kind of goes to how the, what we see there is that the district has been expanded, and we see more brick in the bungalows that are found in the northern portion of the historic district than in
Yeah.
what was
And-
the original area there, where it was primarily the wood frame and shotgun style buildings.
Right. But again, many of the bungalows, even their column bases are brick piers as opposed to wood all the way down.
Elaine, will we discuss alternative materials at some point in this review of the guidelines as a topic?
Yes, if you would, I think that would be good if you're suggesting that we bring that back as a
That's-
specific topic for discussion, and we can
Yeah.
definitely do that.
Yeah, I think
that
so.
would be a good idea. And we should schedule a long time for it.
I think also the guidelines probably need to put some definitions in here, because what some people think is artificial and what some manufacturers think is artificial, the general public does not. And because I know, and when you put the Dolly Varden siding on these, here, any of these sidings, hardy board, which is used extensively in Hyde Park and Seminole Heights, is an artificial material. It's a cementitious material, just like a sheet of drywall. And it has its limitations as well. If it gets chipped or cracked or broken and moisture gets in, it'll disintegrate faster than a piece of wood.
With that, do we have any other comments on roofing at this time?
Sorry.
The roofing one.
Sorry, I'm sorry. We got way off the topic, didn't we? You have more concerns that you're going through.
I did have something on the roofing. So you said that the common thing that you run into, which I think probably would be the common thing, is that somebody wants to replace a metal roof with an asphalt shingle roof.
Yes.
Because metal roofs are more expensive. And so how do you rectify that? Because in here it actually does say that it has to be replaced with the material that's in keeping with the original.
Yes, at staff level, we have, we do only approve metal roofs to be replaced with metal roofs if there's if somebody has a special circumstance or a special, request. They can take that to the Barrio Latino Commission and see if the BLC will approve it. We also, do offer a grant program from the Interstate Historic Preservation Trust Fund that assists people with roof replacements as one of its one of the items that it can be approved for, and that's for homesteaded properties only, but that's up to a $15,000 grant, which typically does cover the cost of replacing the metal roofs. So
That
we,
would.
That's nice.
we like to be able to help people out with that cost when possible.
Oh, that's good.
Elaine, can you repeat the name of that grant again?
It's the Interstate Historic Preservation Trust Fund. program, and it is actually for the, it includes the area that's in the National Historic Landmark District of Ybor City.
That also extends to West Tampa, doesn't it?
Yes, it can also
And-
be used in the West Tampa Historic
And Tampa
District and the
Heights.
Tampa Heights National Historic District.
Okay.
Seminole Heights got left out.
And then with the sawn wood shingles, well, you said there's not many of those in existence now.
Correct.
But say if somebody has an original and they want to replace it, would it be like a material that represents it, like a, because you know they make shingles now that look like that?
Yeah.
Or could they change it to a metal roof, or you would want it to be in keeping with the sawn wood?
That, in an instance like that, we would take it to the BLC for a public hearing review.
Yeah,
Oh.
okay, because that's complicated.
Okay. Sorry to have distracted your plan, Elaine.
Quite all right, it's positive discussion. So, sort of moving through the, this is in the order which these items are found in this, in these design standards. Looking at, moving on to the next section, which covers new construction, demolition, and moving of buildings. New construction and buildings, can we continue?
You can have a discussion, but we won't be able to have a vote. We
Okay.
won't be able to have elections.
Okay.
Right.
So, new construction and buildings moved to a new location are discussed in the Ybor City Design Guidelines and the old ones as a, sort of in the same treatment. So what we're looking at here is when we talk about where buildings will be relocated, you're sort of looking at the same requirements as you might for new construction with height and width and setbacks and spacing and alignment and making sure that the relocation site is appropriate for the building that's being moved. In these photos, we have some of the vacant sites. The photo on the left, actually the vacant site here, the building was relocated just around the corner, and you can see the rear of it on the facing the side street there. So that's an example of a relocation for a for the purpose of a new project at the previous site. And then there's another vacant lot here that I believe was the result of a demolition. Again, these are a couple of demolition sites that have been left vacant for some time. So the criteria for considering relocation and demolition are found in section 2799 of the city's Code of Ordinances, and they will likely not be repeated here in the way that they are on pages 56 and 57. I believe those are the criteria for demolitions and that was formerly in section 27190. The code has been renumbered since then. So the what we are considering to do is to take out what is specifically delineated by the code and leave that in the code, but here to have more discussion, as there is, about what will be what will be the proposed treatment of the site following the relocation or demolition, if there's a, what's the purpose of removing the building from the site, what happens to the site after relocation or demolition, and then how should vacant sites in general be maintained. There are some sites within the historic district that have been vacant for many years, since the late 60s, since urban renewal, when nothing has been rebuilt on them. So that's those are those are items that we do think about from time to time, whether it's worth it, generally to have maybe a building that's not in use on a site, even if it's not, even if it doesn't really meet the criteria for demolition, or if it's better to just have a vacant site there. So with that, I'd like to hear your discussion on this matter.
Well, your page 55 addresses issues relating to your bullet point about how the vacant sites should be maintained, but that's a tricky one to enforce, and that goes back to code enforcement as opposed to the barrio. I mean, they're out of it once they approve a demolition or a relocation. I think when I sat on ARC, I think what always bothered me and other commissioners was that when folks had come before you to ask for a demolition, you're not supposed to take into consideration what happens to the site after they're demolished. They demolish the building. They don't have to present a plan for what they're going to do, typically. And you're not supposed to take what their future plan is into consideration and saying, oh, we're better off with what's there than what they're proposing to do. And that's always been a conundrum for the boards to have to deal with in those considerations. And once developers come into, fortunately in the historic districts, developers are more minimal than in the outer parts of the city. So the appropriateness of what they're doing, fortunately, has to go before the barrio. Could the structure be adapted? So much that happens is demolition by neglect, which was also a big issue several years ago, even, because owners just leave the buildings go. They develop cracks in the roof, and the roof collapses, and all of a sudden it's an economic hardship for them to renovate the building and bring it back up to speed when all along the way they've been purposefully neglecting it. And maybe not purposefully, but most of the time it appears that way. And, they just don't want to put their money into whatever property they have. The cigar factories have several owners who fall into that category, quite frankly. And I don't know if it's even possible to do something about, maybe there's another section in here that needs to be added for required building maintenance in the longer term, especially abandoned, empty buildings.
Again, I think that falls more with code. We don't want to overstep our boundaries because code has a job. Code also has a job to do, and with demolition, they handle. I believe they have things in place if the building is overrun, what should be done. But looking at the demolition guidelines, I do want to make sure what stays in the guidelines is about the landscape features, because I know when some homes are moved, things are destroyed during the move.
Sure.
I do want to make sure those things are redeveloped or maintained. But as far as the building, I like you were saying with the art, we can't, I guess, add into the guidelines what could possibly, not what could possibly happen, but repurposing that land. I don't think we should touch anything in regards to repurposing land or facades.
Yeah, and I was going to ask, the vacant land, who owns it?
Somebody.
So we can't just do things to land that we don't own.
Right.
Oh, yeah. it
So then
needs
we're
a-
limited, it's
Well,
limiting.
yeah, I mean, every vacant parcel has an owner somewhere.
Either the city or private.
So what can be proposed for it is based on who owns it and what they would allow.
Well, if the guidelines, at least here, we've got some minimum criteria for maintaining an empty lot. And the poor owners sometimes are compounded. I know Tampa Heights has had issues on and on and on again about homeless. You know, people will clean up their lots and then, you know, in another month,
Something else.
it's full of debris again. So I can see why owners get frustrated at being responsible for this kind of maintenance when they probably feel they're not getting enough assistance from the city. I do not think fencing off the vacant lots is beneficial to the neighborhood.
I disagree.
You think?
For safety issues, I know with residential area, if the lot has an entrance and it's not fenced off, a lot of, you know, for safety, if someone goes on that property, you know, it's an
Yeah.
eyesore, but
Well, and then the owner is liable for
Liable.
whatever happens on that property as well.
So would this be kind of out of our scope?
I don't know. I don't see on the minimum standards any references to fencing, but the fences are controlled by the historic districts, and if you put up you're limited to a 4-foot fence in a front yard, and what good does that do? I'm on page 56.
yeah, and also
Yeah.
on page 67, there are fencing and wall.
Where are you, 50?
Commissioners,
67.
fencing and fences and walls will be a topic for future discussion.
Oh, okay.
I will note that it is a little difficult to work with what's appropriate fencing on a vacant site, given the way that most of the code and our design guidelines are worded. But
Okay.
Madam Chair, since I think that's the end of that specific topic that you guys were discussing,
Okay.
I'd ask staff to continue this discussion at our next meeting. Since there's no other items that we could do on this agenda, I'd ask for Madam Chair to adjourn the meeting, and the next meeting is scheduled for, and just announce when the next meeting is scheduled for.
Right. And hopefully, I don't, is it possible to alert the board members of the meetings with more future notice? You know, give them a heads up and then give us a reminder, and because I know we all got the schedule, but it seems like many people have ongoing conflicts on those days that if they had enough notice, perhaps those could be rescheduled.
I will speak with Mr. Fernandez about that.
Okay.
That's certainly something to discuss further with him.
All right, great. So it is 10:14 approximately, and we will adjourn the meeting to September 21, 2021 at 9 a.m. in this location. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Well, the way you treat me, baby, I'm gonna have to set you